So Ben, Palladyne AI, it's this AI platform for robots. The company has been around for over 40 years, and I would really love to start with sort of the evolution of how you went from hardware robotics to now focus purely on AI software.
Sure. So Hope, as you point out, 30 years plus of doing work on the hardware side of robotics. A lot of people have probably seen some of the robotics that our company has produced over the years. If you've been to the Disney theme parks and you've been on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, you've seen some of our robots. There are those pirates on that ride. If you've been at Universal Studios and you've been on the Jurassic Park ride, those large dinosaurs, robotic dinosaurs, are our creations. And the fountains in front of the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas are some of our creations. So that's kind of emblematic of some of the things that we did as a company back in the 80s and 90s. In the 2000s, we started working a lot with the Pentagon on human form factor robots, specifically exoskeletons, which were intended to be wearable robots that would give you the ability to lift hundreds of pounds without breaking a sweat. And so we were actually the robotics division of Raytheon for about 7 years. They bought us in 2007. And then we spun back out of Raytheon at the end of 2014, early 2015, became an independent company again, and raised some more capital and focused on trying to bring a couple of different hardware robotic platforms to market. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We wound up going public in 2021 through a reverse merger with a SPAC. And at that time, I actually retired from the business. I'd been a public company CEO several times before, didn't want to do it again. And so we wound up turning it over to a management team. We wound up doing an acquisition after that transition happened. And that got us into a much broader range of hardware products that we were trying to bring to market. What ultimately resulted in the pivot, though, was we realized that we were burning through a lot of cash at a prodigious rate because we were pursuing too many different hardware platforms and trying to commercialize all of them at once. So when I came back to the company last fall and started looking at what our opportunities were, we realized that the software platform that we had been developing for use on our hardware platforms had a wide range of applicability beyond just our own robots. So we decided to focus on that because that was the most near-term economic opportunity that we had. And today, that's what we're all about, is our software AI platform for robots.
So one thing that I'm fascinated by, and you're not the only company that's been talking about this, is to be asset light. And as you wound down the hardware operations of the business and moving now more toward software, I would love for you to share why companies are obsessed with being asset light.
And it really has to do with return on investment and return on assets, which are some key metrics that companies are looked at in terms of what their profitability and use of capital is. And when we were looking at being exclusively in the hardware business, our business model was to keep the robots on our balance sheet. And that would require a significant amount of capital. A very capital intensive business. It's almost like a leasing business. If you think about the rental car business, there's an awful lot of money that is tied up in the inventory in those cars. And so asset light gives you the ability to pursue high margin businesses without having to invest a ton of your own capital to do it. Of course, there's a lot of money invested in getting our software to be mature and commercial. But once you've gotten to that point, then your margins are quite high and you don't have to tie up a lot of capital in inventory. And capital is expensive, obviously.
And that really means that a concentration of only a handful of actual hardware makers, is there not risk in that? If you're looking, this is not your business any longer, but I just mean from an overall perspective of any company, in this space, and now you're, going up against the Palantirs of the world with software, but just to really tie up this conversation on the hardware side just for a second, I do wonder if there is concentration risk. You see that with NVIDIA, for example, talking constantly about how they're going to keep up with demand. But if we put so much pressure on just a few companies to make hardware, isn't that a risk for, the global economy?
There are a lot of companies still in the hardware business. In fact, if you look at the number of newly funded robotic startups, hardware startups over the last 3 years, it's in the dozens or hundreds of companies. So I don't think that there's any lack of competition or concern about there not being enough robotic platforms in the marketplace. Just look at the humanoid opportunity. You've got a dozen companies that really didn't even exist. They weren't on anybody's radar 2 years ago. So I think that there's still a lot of money and interest going into hardware companies. It's just not for us today.
Yeah, I do wonder if you, as you've been watching Tesla, pivot over to talking more about Optimus, NVIDIA talking about robotics more, if you feel like you made the right decision to move out of robotics at this time.
Look, we're still in the robotics business. We're just focused on the software side. We're focused on making robots smarter. And I think that's a great business opportunity for us. And the more hardware companies there are, that means the more potential customers there are for us.
And your AI is, even though it's software, obviously, and you're, again, no longer in just the hardware business, you are bringing it into the physical world. There are several applications of this that you're using specifically for the defense side of some of the technologies. Go through most of the developments that you've been focused on. And I think the other aspect of this question is, because defense is not a consumer-facing industry, you and I day to day can interact with your technology. Are there applications on the commercial side? So those two questions.
Sure, I'll take the second one first. So we definitely are dual use capability technologies. So we are focused both on commercial applications and on defense applications. We have two different software products that we're bringing to market. One is focused on mobile autonomous vehicles. So initially drones. I'll talk about that in a second. The initial use cases there are primarily in the defense space, but there are still commercial applications as well. And then we have our Palladyne IQ product, which is intended for stationary or fixed in place robots, those kinds of robots that you see on a factory floor, for example. And there, our software is being used by both, or has the potential to be used by both commercial applications like manufacturing companies, but also on the defense side. So one of the things that we've publicly talked about with that product is our work with the Air Force, where we are putting our software on robots they already have and enabling those robots to do things like sandblasting and media blasting of components that right now that work is being done by humans wearing hazmat suits and, paint booths. And now we can take humans out of that dangerous and dull, boring work and have a robot doing that same job. So to answer your question, both the defense side and the commercial side, and we think we have significant opportunities on both sides of the equation.
And if you look at the defense sector right now, it's pretty hot. I mean, you've got companies like Anduril really beating the drum on why the contracts of the past no longer work and why maybe companies like yours and theirs is the way of the future. Can you share a little bit about the difference between the Lattice Anduril platform and Shield AI HiveMind? And this question is courtesy of a friend, Colin Demarest, who writes the Future of Defense newsletter at Axios.
Yeah, so we're focused on a very specific use case on drones, which I don't believe either of those companies are currently focused on. And this is a result of some development work that we've been doing with Air Force Research Labs for more than 5 years. And the focus is being able to have drones that are small form factors, generally kind of the same size of drones that consumers are used to using, and have those drones be able to autonomously coordinate with each other if there are multiple drones in the air, and have them be able to autonomously identify, prioritize, and track targets that are on the ground or other objects of interest. And that is something that no small drone has the ability to do today. And I'm not aware of any other companies that are trying to solve that particular technology challenge. So, when you hear about AI on drones, it sounds like an area that everybody's in, but the reality is the word AI or the terminology is as broad as the terminology software. So when you think about software, well, you got all kinds of different software. You have software in your car, you have software on your desktop PC, you have software on your phone. Same thing with AI. You've got it in a myriad of different use cases and applications, and all of them can be very different. How
important was that to have, though, in the name of your company as you rebranded from Starcoast?
It was essential because we wanted to make it really clear. We are focused on algorithms, which is a term for artificial intelligence, computer algorithms that can make machines smarter. And so that's why we put it into our name, because that is our entire focus.
All right, let's go deeper into the defense and specifically on the Air Force Research Lab, which you announced this week of winning that contract. What exactly are you helping the Air Force in implementing? Because this is sort of a startup within the Air Force, right? This particular unit of the Air Force.
Yeah, Air Force Research Labs is where all of the innovation is done in the Air Force for new technologies, and we've worked with them for a lot of years on a variety of different contracts. In this particular case, we have already developed with them our AI platform to be able to be used on certain types of compute capabilities. So it's currently being used on NVIDIA chips and we're working on developing it to be able to be used on Qualcomm chips. But there's a whole new category and generation of AI chips that even Jensen has talked about that are always coming down the pike. And so in this particular case, we're being funded to evolve our software to be able to work on other types of chips other than the ones that we're currently working on.
And as I was reading about this last night, it seems to me, and tell me if this is the wrong analogy, you're almost like the Android sort of operating software, or you want to be neutral. You want to be able to operate across hardware platforms, across chips. Is that the right analogy, the right way to think about how your software, how you're trying to focus your software?
Yes and no. So in the one sense, we are truly hardware agnostic. We want to be able to work on all different types of stationary and mobile platforms. But at the same time, we're not an operating system itself. We ride on top of the existing operating system. So when we talked about what we're doing with our drone software, we don't replace the operating systems that's on the drone. We don't replace the autopilot that's on the drone, but we work in tandem or partnership with that software to be able to take advantage of the capabilities that are already existent in that drone platform. So we kind of ride on the top of existing operating systems, whereas Android on the phone actually is the operating system of the phone.
So you're like an app, basically.
Yes, that's a great way of thinking about it.
Okay, great. So because, everybody is out here with the pick and shovel, analogies of thinking about NVIDIA and AI. So I wanted to paint a clear picture for consumers who are not as familiar. We recently on this show had the CEO of Red Cat, and you have a partnership with them. They had a partnership with Palantir, but you also had a partnership with them on a multi-drone collaborative autonomous flight. That is a lot to digest. So let's break that down. Multi-drone collaborative autonomous flight. To me, it sounds like when we think about the future of self-driving cars talking to each other. I'm thinking now is when you're saying multi-drone collaborative autonomous flight, these are drones in the air talking to each other. Is that the right way to look at this?
You got it. That is exactly correct. So imagine a scenario where there might be an object of interest on the ground and it's moving. Let's say it's a truck convoy, and you've got a couple of drones in the air, and the lead drone has eyes on the convoy. The convoy might go under a bunch of trees, might split up. The second drone might have eyes on it, but the first one doesn't. The drones can actually talk to each other and enhance the intelligence about what's going on the ground, both for the drones themselves and for the operator of the drones.
Now, I feel like the importance of this type of of this intercommunication between drones is that you then have safety safety and reliability of the drones. Because if the operators, for example, lose connection, the drones at least will be able to maybe to talk to each other. Is that the right way to think about the problem that this is solving for?
I think it's more than that. One of the problems that we're solving for is the idea that people on the ground are always looking for, particularly in the military, they're looking for better situational awareness about what's going on. And right now, the way that's done is you have one operator flying a drone, and it's a one-to-one person-to-drone relationship. And that information comes from the drone to the operator, and that's the sole focus of that person on the ground. Well, now imagine a scenario where you can have a single operator on the ground managing and monitoring a fleet of drones that are in the air. And they're getting smarter by being able to talk to one another and share and collaborate sensor data that the drones are individually collecting. And so overall, we're enhancing the situational awareness about what's going on the ground. And that's providing decision makers with more information than what they would otherwise have.
It's really building scale into the management of this so that you could deploy potentially many more drones using this system versus a one-to-one operator managing, these drones individually.
That's correct.
Now, the other thing that I'm really fascinated by is the fact that this is all sort of processed on the drones themselves. This isn't going to the cloud and coming back to the device, to the actual the fleet. And I feel like that's important because of a couple of reasons, including, latency, which is really important in these situations. But I do wonder about just the sheer use of power and energy that requires. Are these chips powerful enough? Do we have enough of them? The energy requires for these drones to do all of the computations on themselves, as they're flying and on these missions.
So the answer to your question is, if we were talking about this 3 or 4 years ago, the answer would be no. There's not enough compute power. But what we've got today on the most modern versions of these drones is there is enough compute power. And the more compute power, obviously, the more capable we are in terms of processing data from sensors and informing both the drone and the operator about what needs to happen. We take the same approach with our industrial robotic platforms, which is to compute everything on the edge, not rely on cloud connectivity, which not only deals with latency, but also deals with the cost of sending data over the cloud.
Now, when you think about again, back to one of my original questions in the beginning is the concentration risk. I know you're working with Qualcomm. I know you're working with NVIDIA. Do we have enough chip makers to be able to, again, feed all the demand that the AI LLMs are requiring right now and what you're doing? I mean, do you see any demand supply chain risks there?
I don't see any concerns on the kind of edge compute chips that we rely on. A lot of AI, particularly digital world AI, that's relying on processing in data centers, there's a tremendous amount of demand for what NVIDIA is putting out there. No question about it. But we're not subject to that same kind of limitation because edge compute is a much smaller market with more players in it than what you see on the data center side.
All right, let's talk about the future. One of the things that we're watching is a report from the Information, and the report says that Palantir may be in talks to invest $5 billion in Shield AI with participation from Lockheed Martin. What is your edge? What gives you the ability to compete in this industry when you have deeper pockets competing for the same kinds of contracts?
We have a fundamentally different approach to AI than many other companies that are out there. This notion of using large foundational models with large language models and millions or billions of data points to train these models, that requires a lot of time and a lot of people, and therefore a lot of money. And so you need to have really big capital resources and big budgets to be able to approach that kind of robotic training. We take a very different approach. We don't do anything on the cloud. We don't use large foundation models. We have a much more targeted, discrete approach to training robots how to perform tasks. And it doesn't require millions or billions of data points to do it. So I won't say that our solution works for all applications, but for the applications that we're focused on, we can do this with much fewer financial resources, and we can be much faster in the deployment.
Asset light. Okay, so we're talking today, the weekend before the inauguration of President-elect Trump into his second term. What do you expect the defense sector to look like over the next 4 years?
I think we're going to see more opportunities for small companies. No question about that. I think that everybody acknowledges that the historic approach of relying only on the prime contractors, prime defense contractor, is not the way to get new innovation in the hands of our warfighters. So I expect to see a lot more focus on innovation. I don't know that we'll go a lot faster for the first year or two because it always takes a while to turn the battleship. But I think this is an exciting time to be a small company that is focused on helping helping our country with regard to new technologies. It has not always been that way. I mean, it was just 3 or 4 years ago even that there was a lot of talk about innovation, but not a lot of action behind it. And so I think this is an exciting time for us.
Well, does that have anything to do you think, with Elon Musk and his own DNA of favoring companies that have been maybe overlooked in the past? I mean, his companies now are giant, of course, but that is something that everyone has been talking about. Is that sort of one reason you're optimistic smaller companies have a chance?
I don't think it's so much about Elon per se. I think it's more about the recognition that we are at risk of falling behind in introducing new technologies when we look at our near-peer competitors around the world, and that we have to find a different way to get new technologies developed, do it more efficiently, do it more timely, and get it into the hands of warfighters. So I think it's really a realization that we've got to do things differently. And when you talk about an administration that overall is receptive and supportive of entrepreneurialism, I think that's really the big driver.
All right, the last two questions that we have, again, about the future. I want to talk about the regulatory side of things. If you're thinking that the next 4 years could be friendlier to entrepreneurs, do you also believe that the regulatory environment will be maybe friendlier to more deals and also maybe less regulation and inspiring people to take more risks and chances on new technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Trump has talked a lot about, and I think many of his members of his cabinet have talked about these things. There's a clear focus on less regulation, less burden on businesses. There's a lot of burden on small businesses doing business with the Pentagon. We're obligated to adhere to a lot of the same requirements that the big defense contractors are, and I hope to see some progress there that lightens the burden on small companies.
Give us some examples of what you'd like lightened up.
Well, in terms of the accounting systems, the discrete IT systems, I mean, there's a whole range of things that have very direct costs to us that are very time consuming. And it just isn't an efficient use of a small company's capital. So I hope some of those things are loosened up. But
do you think that that's because they want to have a better a look inside of what the technologies are, so that they ensure things are secure? I mean, that example to me sounds like it's something that was designed for safety and security.
It is, but there's a question about how much burden can you put on small companies before you crush them and make it so that they actually can't survive and succeed. So I think we've got to find the right medium. We've got to find the right balance. And it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach that's going to work.
Let's talk about robotics to end this, because we started with the consumer, and on the defense side, we went really deep, but didn't talk enough about the consumer. I find it fascinating that you guys are responsible for a lot of the animatronics a few decades ago. You have the Palladyne IQ product, and this is in the commercial sort of setting. Robotics, as I mentioned, is a big focus for Tesla going on now, their new future, I guess. And then NVIDIA has been, again, talking a lot about robotics. Where do you see the actual timeline? Because the fear is that it's soon, right? That robots are going to take over, or the factories are going to be overrun. But as we know, technology does actually take a lot longer than we think. So what is the realistic timeline of seeing more robotics being augmented to our bodies, to be outfitted with workers on the factory floors in a massive scale that we haven't seen, in the past?
So when we talk about robotics, it too is a very broad category. And the reality is, we have, I think each year for the last 3 years, there have been more than 500,000 industrial robots that have been sold and put into place in manufacturing around the world. 500,000 each year. So that's 1.5 million robots just in the industrial manufacturing space over the last 3 years. I think those numbers are going to continue to go up as we make robots more and more capable. When you talk about other form factors like humanoid robots, I think we got a little ways to go before you see mass adoption. Price points have to come down. Compute power has to go up. Battery life has to be improved to make these things really useful. I think there's a lot of interesting work that's being done, but my crystal ball is not good enough to be able to tell you when I think we'll see dozens or even hundreds of humanoid robots working in every factory across the country. I think there's a ways to go before we're there.
You think it's too soon for investors to be thinking about that as an investment thesis for a company like Tesla, for example, which has, in the last couple of months, again, pivoted so hard to say the future of Tesla's is these humanoid robot fleets that are going to potentially be the most lucrative part of their business? Do you think that's a too far-fetched argument to be making right now?
I don't if you're a long-term investor. If you're a day trader trying to focus on what's going to drive your portfolio next Monday, yes, it's too soon. But if you're really interested in where technology and the economy is going over the next 5-10 years, you absolutely ought to be paying attention to that space.
Well, I do think that it's fascinating that all of the factors that you just mentioned about what still needs to happen in order to get that up and running is maybe not talked about enough. I recently spoke with Ty Brady, who is Amazon Robotics chief technologist, and I asked him sort of the same question of displacement. And his answer was, if you look at Amazon's workforce, it's actually grown as they've added robots. Do you agree that robots are not going to be a net detractor of jobs?
I do, very much so. In fact, I think if you look at factories across the country, as they have added more robots, they have also added more people. And I think that's a great thing. I think that the fear of robots taking jobs is overblown. And I think the jobs that they are going to take are going to be the jobs that people don't really want to be doing anyway.
And for investors, last question here. How should they be evaluating companies' stories and narratives about their AI projects and platforms to know what's real and what's hype?
So I think that the answer really is look at the performance. I mean, take a look at, are customers really embracing the technology? Are they using it, and are they paying for it? Every company that's in the AI space has to answer two big questions. Is their product, does it really work? Is there technology risk? And then secondly, do customers want it? Is there market demand? And are they willing to pay the price that they're asking? And so those are the two things that we ask to be measured by. And I think that's what everybody should be measured by.
Ben, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.